Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at the Globe for a great panel. We're going to be looking at workforce recruitment, development, training, and how this important issue has changed during the whiplash of the COVID-19 pandemic and the concurrent recession. I've got three great panelists here who are going to have a lot to say about it. I'm looking forward to hearing from their perspective on this issue and maybe some tips and hints on how to navigate things. But first, I want to hand this over to Abby Marquand, who is a Vice President and Program Officer for JP Morgan Chase Global Philanthropy. JP Morgan Chase, as you may have noticed, is really investing a lot of money, millions of dollars into Boston right now at a time when the city really needs it. And so I'd like to hear her talk for a couple minutes about that, what's going on, and maybe she can talk a little bit how that relates to the issue at hand. Abby.
Good morning, and thanks, John. On behalf of JP Morgan Chase, we're really excited to be partnering with you today to sponsor today's conversation. So in 2019, JP Morgan Chase made a $350 million philanthropic commitment globally around preparing the labor force for the future of work. We didn't realize last year just how imminent the future would be. And what we're seeing, the crisis that we're seeing related to the pandemic, especially for small businesses and their workforce, has only strengthened our resolve. So we're investing around the globe. We're also investing here in Boston towards closing the racial wealth divide and working with our strategic partners to lift up Boston's communities that have been hardest hit in this moment. Boston Medical Center is one such partner, one example. They're the lead organization in our $5 million Advancing Cities Challenge grant. And with partner hospitals, Boston Children's and Brigham and Women's, they've formed the Boston Opportunity System Collaborative. In addition to a really robust approach to preserving affordable housing and developing new affordable housing, they're also working to provide job training and access to employment for local residents in Boston, especially those who've been displaced due to the pandemic. And they're working with some of the best-in-class nonprofit organizations to do it, including Action for Equity and JVS Boston. So as we look to what is hopefully not too far away, a recovery, we're hoping to deepen our work with our city and with our neighbors to bring Boston back even stronger and to ensure that people of all backgrounds have the economic security that they need to endure and the opportunity to thrive on the other side of this moment in time. So I'm really excited about today's conversation and hearing from the panelists on these important issues, and I thank you. So I'll turn it back to you, John.
Great, thanks, Abby. Well, let me introduce the panel. Without further ado, joining us today, we've got Corey Thomas, the Chief Executive of Rapid7. That's a fast-growing cybersecurity company here in Boston. Aisha Francis, the Chief Executive of the Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology. It's a college in Boston that has a special focus on career preparation. And Neil Sullivan, the Executive Director of the Boston PIC. It's a nonprofit that connects younger people to jobs and internships, mentors in the city. So I'm going to let them talk a little bit more about the first question I have is hopefully to maybe spur them along to explain a little about what they're seeing out there right now. The question really is to the panel, what are you experiencing right now in terms of hiring challenges and in terms of just general workforce challenges in light of this prolonged pandemic and recession, which obviously is we haven't seen a recession like this before, where the economy sort of dropped really quickly, bounced back really quickly, but now there's still aspects of the economy that are falling back, even as other parts of the economy are going forward. So maybe we could start with Corey on that. Let us know what you're seeing from your perspective.
Yeah, first, John, thank you so much for having me here today. I'll start by saying that I'm very fortunate to be in an industry that has some demand right now. Cybersecurity is an area where Our customers need us and want us, and we have healthy demand, so we are hiring. And I think that, one of the core challenges that we actually see around this is we've traditionally been a company that deeply valued coming together, teamwork, and really the whole creative spirit. And if you think about sort of like creative and innovative endeavors, much of it resolves around sort of like the human connection and creatively sparking from one person and that catching on to another person and ideas coming together. And one of the challenges that we've actually had, is the challenge everyone's had, is that we've been work from home and had the distance, and we had a great culture, and we have a great culture that actually started off. But our biggest challenge is we're hiring, is actually how do you actually embed new people as you actually bring them on board into that sense of familiarity that allows that easy creativity to actually spark and happen in what's still primarily a transactional form. Now, I think Zoom or GoToMeeting or other video conferencing software has actually been absolutely amazing. But where lots of our focus has been is sort of like, how do you actually onboard people so that they have this deep sense of affiliation to our customers and the cities that they live in? And that's been a big challenge for us, is sort of like, how do you actually really get people to come in and be part of something when you don't have space as a dimension that people can come together in?
Great. Aisha, I'm sure you're seeing this issue in a variety of industries. What's your take on how things are changing?
Certainly. Well, thank you as well for the invitation to be here and to represent Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology. I'm going to answer this question from the perspective of the students that we serve. We serve a majority population of students of color, Black and Latinx, 86% young men, so a lot of men of color. And in pre-COVID times, about 80% of our students worked, many part-time and many, unfortunately, full-time. And I say unfortunately because it's very difficult to work full-time and go to school full-time. And the fact that we live in a society where, it's very hard for people to balance both of those things, and yet people are trying. They have the tenacity, they're the resilience and giving it a go. I think speaks to a lot of inequity that we're in the midst of, and many more people have said that they would like to address. So what we've seen is a sharp decline in the number of students who are reporting that they have work. That means that many of them are not going to go to school because they're paying their way through college. So the difficult thing is for us as an institution to figure out how we can recognize, meet students where they are, understand that many of them are heads of household. They're going to need to contribute to their household. How do you help people find work in this moment that supports their educational aspirations and doesn't detract from that? So one of the examples that I want to lift up is, that there are larger companies, very large multinational companies that are thinking about this. And I think to the extent that we can help plug students into that, it's helpful. And to the extent that those programs are models for mid-size and smaller companies, all the better. One is Archways to Opportunity, which is McDonald's corporation program. This is a program that for students who are working part-time pays a tuition grant to any educational institution. So they don't restrict it to online education only, which some other multinationals do. So we have some students who are going to be taking advantage of Archways to Opportunity, and it's a grant that they offer. So it's not reimbursement, which is a barrier, and it's not dependent on grades, which is a barrier. So I think that, that's an example of what we can do. Thankfully, they're still hiring. And I think that, these kinds of efforts that allow people, meet the reality of our situation, allow people to get work that also supports their education is something that I'm hoping we'll see more of coming out of the pandemic, as we talk about moving into a new normal and not actually going back to normal. So that's one of the things that I hope we'll see more of, that we believe will support students like ours as they seek to pursue education, but also need to have income.
Thanks, Aisha. And I want to turn it over to Neil Sullivan at the Boston Private Industry Council. Neil has a unique perspective on what's happening in the workforce through his organization, and also just to the general economic trends that we're seeing in the city. Neil, tell me what you're seeing in this regard.
So first, let me echo what you said, John, in shouting out JP Morgan Chase Foundation, not only the economic development and workforce development investment that Abby spoke to, but also a substantial investment in career pathways from Boston public high schools through local college in partnership with employers such as Rapid 7, very engaged in this kind of work. But this is the glue investment through Investors, a local education foundation that addresses how do we come out of a recession less disparate, less divided, right? So, but the PIC's also the city's workforce board, one of 16 mass hire workforce boards. We oversee the career centers and sort of the front line for the displaced. When you lose your job, you actually are required by the government to go to the career center. One's run by JVS downtown, the other by Morgan Memorial. In Roxbury, both are totally virtual now, but they haven't seen this kind of traffic, well, since the Great Recession. So the PIC is also blessed with a top-notch workforce development director and a top-notch research director, Joe McLaughlin, who many people turn to for on-the-moment labor market information. So I got schooled last night, and I'm a history guy, so let me tell the story here. This is a different recession. I came here from Detroit for college in the mid 70s, and Massachusetts relatively was in the deepest recession of any state in the country. Led to the total collapse of 20th century manufacturing, both in our state and in New England. Fast forward to 91, we had the savings and loan crisis. It's a bank crisis. The region's largest bank, the Bank of New England, collapses and has to be taken over and divvied up to other entities. And then real estate tumbles completely. 20% loss of value for anyone who owned a home or was otherwise invested in housing. Forward to the early 2000, now backpedal, the working class got nailed in the mid 70s. The financial class and the real estate class got nailed in the early 90s. In the 2000s, the innovation class got nailed. It was the dot-com bust. And there were a number of collateral impacts to all of these, but it was a professional class that really took the brunt of it. The Great Recession was broad-based. Everybody got nailed about 12 years ago. And it was pretty much what we think of as an across-the-board and therefore Great Recession. And Massachusetts actually weathered it relatively better because, unlike my hometown of Detroit, it's not industry dependent. It has we have a very broad-based economy. And then we arrive at the pandemic. What's different about this? Well, we all know that it's being visited on lower wage workers, some who are being asked to risk their lives and their families in the essential economy, others of whom have been tossed out completely. Saved for a while by 2 stimulus packages, along with the small businesses that employ them. And we've now arrived at the cliff for that. What you might not know is that this is a recession that is tossing, that is 2/3 women. The Great Recession, 2/3 male displaced from the workforce. The pandemic recession, 2/3 female. Okay. All kinds of attendant things we need to talk about when we talk about workforce development in the short run, retraining. Basically we have 3 classes of folks. Those of us who work from home, who are able to sustain a tech-based professional economy, those who've lost their jobs and can be retrained, and there's some innovative strategies we can talk about, and then those who are out of the workforce and will be for a while. And what does that mean for our community? And what does that mean for our economy? And that's really the conversation we need to have collectively informed by individual employer and academic experiences. And, we're a big fan of BFIT. Ben Franklin is where we send a lot of our high school students because, we know they're going to get internships immediately employed right after. So, we got some good examples of what to do here on the panel.
Great. Thanks, Neil, for that perspective. And I just want to let the audience know our chat function is disabled, but if you have questions, we do have a Q&A function. Please put the questions in there and we'll try to get to some of those at the end. I've got questions. I've also some of the audience members have submitted questions in advance. We're going to get to some of those, but we also want to take some live questions too. So you can do that by just clicking into the Q&A function in the Zoom. Another big question. I'm curious about everyone's perspective on this, and you can. I'm going to ask everybody this question, but you can focus on one angle of government, city, state, or federal if you want. I'm curious what policymakers should be doing, either at the state, city, or federal level, and what do you think is the most effective policy that they have been doing this year to get people retrained and into the jobs that do exist? I think maybe I'll start with Daisha on that.
Sure, thank you for the question. So at the city level, I'll take this from the city level, what we've seen is really inventive use of CARES Act funds to help stem the tide, kind of cushion the blow for students in terms of getting emergency funds to us and institutions like us for students who suddenly found themselves unable to continue paying their way through college. I think certainly, thank the city for those kinds of efforts. Ways to capitalize on the fact that we're moving into this forced digital age. I think what we need funding to think about is how to keep the best parts of virtual and hybrid education, but to bridge the digital divide. This isn't going to work if students aren't able to sign on, if you've got hotspots that don't work very well. So I would like to see at the city and really the state level, more investment in the infrastructure that's needed in order to keep students and their families connected, so that we can be, in a very practical sense, deliver online education or hybrid education reliably. We've seen a big barrier with that, and really trying to meet a lot of needs as students are scrambling and finding themselves without the bandwidth they thought they had once there's now 6 people in their household who are online. So that's an area of investment that we still need in terms of infrastructure, and where I think we should be seeing more attention paid from a policy perspective and investment.
Great. Corey, what do you think?
I think so. One, I echo Aisha's comments. I would expand a little bit if you think about the state, especially the federal level, is, I think lots of the criticism about some of the stuff this year was about sort of the efficiency of, some of this spending, who is it going to and not. And I think we have to be focused on that, of course, but I think we just can't forget that if there's any time for a blunt instrument, it's this time. And we have to stay focused on what really matters. I think ultimately what really matters is how do we keep as many people engaged in work as possible and in the economy as possible. So, and I think that ultimately is going to come down to sort of like the federal government and its ability to actually wisely use deficit spending to actually incentivize and reward and offset, in some case, sort of like both employers and workers. And I think it has to be dual pronged. I think that we have to sort of like really focus on employers that are actually keeping workers engaged, and most importantly, actually adding at-risk or workers who've been harmed back to the economy. And I actually think that like policy can do a job of incentivizing the students at Benjamin Franklin, the people who may have been out of the economy, and actually making it both attractive and desirable for actually employment to support that. You can't have that strategy without a strategy that supports those small businesses. which have been disproportionately hurt in this environment. So I am a fan of, I think we have to acknowledge that sometimes the tax and the transfer system is not efficient, but I think there are times where you can actually be inefficient and that be the right thing. And I think this is definitely one of those times. The second aspect I would actually hit on quickly is we have to have a recovery, though, that is more equitable and more accessible in many ways, and starts to actually transition. And when I think about sort of like that, I think about sort of like what is long-term valuable for us to actually develop. And I would just point out is that we still have a massive infrastructure backlog in this country today. And the question that I actually look at is, if you think about that infrastructure backlog and you actually think about how do you actually prepare workers to actually sort of like participate in that fully, we should look at that. We should actually look at the health ecosystem. We should look at technology, but we should actually think about those things that we should be spending as a country lots of investment in over the next 10 years. And how do we actually ensure that the participation is not the same participation that it was in the last 20 years?
Great, thanks, Corey. Neil, what about you? You obviously your organization sort of at an intersection of business and government. What do you think government should be doing to step up, and what have they been doing that's been good so far?
Hey, well, let's get together and come up with a plan for the third stimulus.
Yeah,
There's going to be a third stimulus, and the question is, can we, business, government, the community, academia, come up with a brilliant way to spend a major federal investment? Because the suffering this country will experience over the next 6 weeks will set up a major investment to triage what's happening. That starts with housing. I've never seen the shared interests of tenants and landlords come together so clearly. Okay, it's a major workforce issue along with childcare. These are the foundations of a workforce. Just ask George Pullman from the late 1800s. If you don't deal with housing, you don't have an economy. And we're hemorrhaging right now, and we're pitted against one another and somehow managing not to tear each other's throats out on a housing crisis that's only going to deepen. It's the foundation of our workforce along with childcare. Beyond that, we need to think about the young ones. And, that's a lot of where my time and energy goes and always has. We need to take our Black and brown high school students and introduce them to the workforce now, so that they see what folk who make money do. As a friend of mine, Ed Powell, always says, you got to see it to be it. And we need to do it earlier. So they, and through them, their families aspire in different ways. And so they know what education can deliver for them, so they're motivated. Aspiration precedes motivation. And I think our business community employers can take a major step. And obviously, this new platform, we flipped hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of in-person summer jobs at the hospitals and the banks and the Vertex and we flipped them digital and just threw it up in the air and said, you go to it, adults, you figure out how to keep kids busy and pay them. And it happened. It's amazing. And those kids learn skills that will unlock possibilities for them. Okay, because we all got to learn how to relate to one another on the internet, apparently. And young people want to learn how to relate to adults. They're real curious about us all. So I think that's a big part of it. And we have to have an infrastructure to do it. We have to make it work well, because no one wants to be involved in anything less than quality initiative. But let's make a plan for spending big money in the third stimulus. It's got to happen. There's going to be a lot of damage over the next 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is. And we got to be ready with a spending plan to triage it, to mitigate it. And then we have to long-term plan to bridge our communities into Corey's industries, healthcare, and across the state, advanced manufacturing.
Great. You touched on an issue that I hear a lot about from employers, and so I'm going to kind of dive into some of the questions that came in advance. one of them is what can employers do to support their employees' childcare needs to enable them to return to the workforce? You know, I talked to one CEO of a fairly large organization in Boston who said he's losing employees, even though the kids are at home. His workers need to stay at home to guide their kids through school. So, like Neil, you said this, the brunt is being borne by women. I think, even though speaking for myself, even though men do an awful lot of childcare, it still, women do pick up more than the majority. So, Neil, you can talk about what employers should be doing to do this support, provide this support, both during the pandemic and afterwards. And I obviously also want to hear from Corey and Aisha on that. Neil, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's a planning mission in the short run. We have to create safe spaces and think about it month to month over the next 6 to 8 months. For those who need talent on the screen doing the work, it's incumbent on employers to be part of a strategy to care for their children and to care about their children's education. That's an incredible retention strategy, by the way, to care about the families of your employees. And that does lead you to childcare. And you think about that way, and you start to think about what is the child rearing experiences that my employees are going through right now. And what is it that I can do to make them more productive and happier, which leads to productivity.
What about you, Corey and Aisha? What's your take on this issue, which I'm sure both of you are hearing about?
Sure. Well, we have remained except only for the most essential folks in the business office and so forth, giving people the okay to work from home. And I think flexibility is paramount in this moment. And while it is true that I as a leader recognize that we need to figure out a way to also relieve some of the work, to say you're home, but you still have these childcare expectations and you still have the same workload. It's better, but even that is very difficult and it's stressful. And I think that, for us, what's been hard is to try to even figure out, well, what can come off of people's plates so that we could do some of these innovative things, no meeting Fridays or no meeting Wednesdays and things like that. They're good ideas. It's been difficult, honestly, for us to put those things into practice, but we have made it clear that people should feel comfortable working from home, and that we are, for those faculty who are coming back, it is voluntary. So, that's one of the things that we've done, and also just been as understanding as possible when folks, can't make something because they need to parent. And we continue to also refer people to our employee assistance program and those kinds of benefits to try to get some additional support from the resources that we have in-house. It's not a sufficient answer, but it's what we're cobbling together, and as we all try to make our way through this.
Corey, what are you doing at Rapid 7 in this regard? What do you think you should be doing?
Yeah, well, I think there's probably sort of like two essential things. One is that we are very focused on giving people the flexibility, but also giving people the space. I think it was well said earlier, it's not just sort of flexibility, but it's also just the amount of work that's actually there. And we're from our employees that they're working nonstop. I think there's two things that we're really focused on. One is sort of like, how do you actually enable more flexibility so that people can actually not work a standard day around it. The second thing that we're trying to be intentional about is, how do you actually offload some of the work, and how do you actually think about what's critical work and what's not critical work? And I would say we've done a mixed job there. But this is one of the areas, though, where we've started to actually thoughtfully make some moves about actually adding more workers in to actually offset it and actually broadening our employee base to actually make it better for our workers who were there before, but also adding new workers to the workforce. And that is actually showing some level of dividends. I would say the other piece that I would say that I'm explicitly doing, which is not sort of very, is not an outward statement to our employees, but we're definitely doing behind the scenes, is the comments that you actually made earlier, John, about sort of like the disproportionate effect on women and professional women in their careers is huge. And so one of the things that our team is actually really focused on is really being very careful as we actually think about and assess performance over the course of the next year, and have a new view of sort of like bias almost as it relates to sort of like making sure we're not measuring how much time is actually spent, and that we're actually being thoughtful about sort of like who has time available to spend and that's available, and ensuring that that doesn't derail people's career tracks in and of itself. Because to me, one of the travesties would be is if the pandemic actually ended up disproportionately affecting women and their career tracks and their promotion velocities. And that's just something you just have to actually be attentive to and ask the question and focus on. The last thing I'll close out on is that this is, if there's anything, as Neil said earlier, that's not a sort of a company by company thing, this is a systematic thing that we have to think about healthcare and think about that as both a public but also a private thing. And our system is clearly broken. And I think whether you look at the business associations that Rapid7 is a part of or other groups, is I think this is one that's going to last and come out of it and say, listen, we have to do better at how we think about our healthcare ecosystem and how it works in general. And that's something that we're focusing our efforts in partnering outside of our company to say we just have to have a better infrastructure there.
Great. I know one recurring theme from the questions in advance is where are the opportunities? I'm trying to think of something positive here. You know, I heard from people who are over 50 who've lost their jobs, people who are just graduating college, who are trying to find jobs, people with MBAs who've lost their jobs. Where are the biggest opportunities right now? What kind of advice can you provide to them? And is it different? Are the opportunities different depending on the age and experience? I don't know, Neil, do you want to take?
Yeah, if I could jump on a very immediate opportunity, and I believe in shout outs when shout outs are deserved. Governor Baker gets a double shout out today, A, for appointing Kimberly Budd as Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, and second for the workforce package he just put out. It's called Partnerships for Recovery. He's got a $10 million investment based on the planning process he's done with workforce boards, calls it his workforce skills cabinet. And now he's going to invest $10.4 million in transitioning workers into the primary industries identified in the state plan, which are healthcare, technology, and advanced manufacturing. So it's not good news in itself for small business. It has collateral benefits, but he wants to work with large employers and entrepreneurs in the state to create transition plans for those who've been tossed out of the economy. One of the more innovative things on the good news front, John, is Best Corporation, which is a training entity of the hotel and restaurant workers with the union hotels, is actually training in collaboration with the major hospitals to transition displaced hotel workers into the hospitals. Who houses more people than the hospitals? There's a transferability there, and these kinds of entrepreneurial connections, you know, across industries are targets of opportunity. Also, he's putting $9.2 million on internet connectivity. I mean, if there's a next step toward equity, it's internet, quality internet and quality devices for all. Nobody's going to work for Corey 10 years from now without that internet advantage now. And we just have to address internet disadvantage everywhere. And he's putting over $9 million in that, about 15 million in the Career Technical Institute and other workforce funds. What I'm saying is there's a spending opportunity now, and not even before the stimulus, which has to happen.
What about you, Corey?
Yeah, I was
Obviously,
gonna,
cybersecurity, it seems like there's some opportunities there. What are you seeing?
yeah, so one, there's definitely opportunities in cybersecurity. I think, look, the tech industry has actually been fairly resilient and healthy. And so I agree with the ones that Neil outlined, sort of like the tech industry, the advanced manufacturing is where I actually spend a lot of my time and focus in general. The thing I would actually highlight is sort of like two things. Is one, I actually think that there is something to be concerned, but also a massive opportunity for the Commonwealth and the city of Boston. Is that employers have actually gotten more comfortable with the notion of now hiring and bringing people on in a remote way, which actually opens up lots of aperture of being able to hire people wherever. Now, that's actually a threat in some ways. You could actually say that that's a concern. I think the benefit, though, is that it opens up a new lens on what it actually means to actually be able to actually broaden the aperture about the type of experiences and backgrounds that we can actually find employment for and actually bring in. And in both Rapid7 and a number of other both business groups and organizations are taking a hard look at actually how we can actually use that to actually catalyze that, to actually hire more in Massachusetts. And I agree, I echo the state's efforts to actually do the training, because I think really what you want to marry up is that there are still jobs. There's a lot of jobs that are actually out there. You want to marry that up with the training. And most importantly, I think we want to make sure that, when you think globally, the Commonwealth gets the largest share of those jobs. And that's my biggest sort of like focus and concern right now. So Rapid7 specifically, what we've actually done, just actually highlighted there, is that we have several multi-year initiatives to not just sort of like hire, we've gone from, we're a small to mid-sized company, but we're 2,000 people around the world, roughly half in the state of Massachusetts. And we've actually done a big shift where we're actually looking at bringing in a significant percentage of our new hires each year from non-traditional career paths. And when you think about like the traditional career paths, it's either within the industry or from a very narrow set of colleges and universities. And really what we're actually focused on is how do we actually bring in people. So we've had partnerships with organizations like Hack Diversity, where we're bringing in a number of individuals into the tech sector who've never been in the tech sector before. But I think these types of initiatives allow us to actually fill our pipelines, which are actually key, but actually fill our pipeline with people where those opportunities may not have been clear and present before.
I think that that dovetails really nicely with the kind of work that we welcome industry to partner with a place like Benjamin Franklin Institute to do. We are a minority serving institution, so we don't have HBCUs in Massachusetts, but we have minority serving institutions, and we are one. I think in terms of innovation and what's happening now and what's good is that we've taken a look at this environment and recognize that from the standpoint of industry and from the standpoint of individuals who are interested in education. So there is an impatience. So we shortened a lot of our programs and made them stackable to degrees, but we stood up 6 certificate programs in areas that are resilient. So cybersecurity, machining, so CNC machining, and also CAD, the CAD program that relates to machining. Those are 3 examples, with the idea that those are areas where people are still hiring. So we want to make it easier and faster for people to get retooled in those spaces. And I think, encouraging folks who are looking at this moment at the kind of nexus of living out their racial justice statements, from May through mostly from May to August, and giving people opportunity is to really look at places where diverse pools are. And in our state, in our Commonwealth, we do have pockets of diversity, and we encourage folks to take a lead from organizations like Rapid7, which are finding ways to do that in a systematized way, right? That works for them and for their organization. And I think other minority serving institutions in the region are happy to work in a very bespoke manner with companies, no matter the size, to figure out what the right match is for them with the students that we have. So, I think shorter education and education in areas that continue to be resilient are places where we're focusing as a college. We have the benefit of the fact that we were already training in those areas anyway, but the big shift is doing that in a way that's shorter so people can get the training in a year or less, get a job at a place that hopefully will support their education, and they can keep going to school to get the associate's degree.
Great. I want to, before we get too far into the hour, I want to get to some of the questions from our audience. That there are some good ones that are coming in. Maybe this is a good one for you, Aisha. With various colleges struggling to keep their doors open, how can the city keep our youth engaged and motivated so a downfall doesn't happen in the future? What's your take on that one?
Well, I think one of the things is this month is College Month for Boston Public Schools. So, we've certainly participated in that with panels. I mean, I think that we do need, to double down on whatever we can do to get, honestly, money in the hands of some students, or to remove the barrier or the sense that money will be a barrier for college. We live in a city that has a tuition-free community college program. I think people just need to have more awareness about some of those opportunities and what the eligibility criteria is. This is a moment to really, I think, relax eligibility criteria and things of that nature as much as possible, so that we can really expand the pool of people who can participate in some of the programs that are existing. So I think those are things that the city can do, and really encourage students to just do what they can to stay focused on the goal and not take this as this gap year, because for too many students, this is not a gap year opportunity. It's going to end up where they just never go to school. They never progress. And that's what, when we look back and not in 5 or 10 years, in 2 or 3 years, one of my big worries is that there will be a whole, swath of folks who missed this moment because of stress and because of so many systemic things that I acknowledge are there. But I think that what we can do to open doors of opportunity is really get more money in the hands of low-income families who need it, and also connect that money to training and education as much as possible.
Great. Neil, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm thinking about what President Francis said about students who continue to learn even after they enter the employment with a degree or certificate. I think we all need to think about that. If we're going to include populations that have not benefited from the economy, who have not been able to build wealth, we have to recognize that they don't just shut it down for school, particularly when they cross that bridge into early adulthood. We're going to have to think about how they can make money and continue to go to school. If we don't address that, we're just going to leave a whole identifiable segments of the population out of the economy, because post-secondary education and certification with the right training is the key to being included in the economy. And I also think about the question in another way, and I think parents are struggling with it throughout Massachusetts, is, are the teachers, there we go, laying it on the teachers again, able to keep my son or daughter's attention through this remote teaching and learning methodology? Okay. And I can't speak for every age group, My spouse is in a Boston public school kindergarten, and I know it involves delivering materials to the houses of her students, a lot of puppetry and very loud noises, which I've been hearing in the background. It's a performance art for 4 and 5-year-olds. But when you get up into the high school space, I think we learned a lot this summer. And it's really 2 things. Engaging with adults who respect them and have things to share, working in teams, and what we in the education world call project-based learning. Okay, and those 3 things come together, and then students persist in the virtual world. And they might even be able to create product of value to employers. That in fact motivates them if they think what they're creating. And it's not just the science whiz who can, figure out how to track genes or something. I mean, I've listened during STEM week, who are these young people? But it's everybody, learning how to collaborate through this new medium, which will be part of our lives, whether it's school or work or college or career. Let's all get trained up now, youth and adults, and let's do it together. Then students will pay attention, particularly the ones that reach adolescence and then transition on to President Francis's institution and others. It's all about producing something that you own, drawing on the assets that you bring and the discipline that you learn.
So Corey, I wanted to try a different question. I just got another question that sort of is a continuation of what you were saying before. After COVID, employees will be looking and wanting more flexibility from employers. And how will employers need to adjust to accommodate this? I guess to rephrase that, what kind of long-term flexibility do you see getting adopted by corporate America, at least by our big employers?
This is a great question, and it's a hot discussion right now. And I would say that both my opinion and I think lots of people's opinions are changing as you actually go through it. And I break it down sort of like very simply. It's like, look, without a doubt, for those that could work from home has been better than expected. It's exceeded very low expectations in terms of what was possible. And that has people rethinking about some of the fundamental assumptions that we actually make about how things have to be. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it was a wake-up call for myself and others that like some of the things that we take as things that it has to be this way just don't have to necessarily be that way. And so I think that was positive. The second thing is, I think about is really 2 things. Is one, and this is what I talked about earlier, is the risk and the opportunity, is I have employees right now who are saying, hey, this is awesome. I want to go sort of like take my salary that's based in Boston and go live in Alabama or somewhere else. Vermont or somewhere else. And that is a pressure that we have to actually think through. Some employers are actually saying, you know what, you can go live wherever and it's fine. Some employers are saying you can go live wherever and we're going to do a cost of living adjustment, typically down, so like depending on where you actually go live. And in Rapid 7, at least for us, we're actually saying like, listen, we're going to actually be based in communities. It'll be several communities but we actually think that there's value to actually being part of communities and being based in communities. But what we're going to do is we're going to have a lot more flexibility. And so instead of thinking about like 5 days a week in the office, it's going to be like 3 days a week in the office and 2 days flex time. That's the right thing for us because, we believe in creative endeavors, that people actually spending some time together when it's safe to do so is still an important factor, and people being together as part of a community is an important factor. But that's sort of our own things. But I think you're going to see lots of people and lots of companies that are going to support that you can actually live and work wherever. And I think that is going to put a certain amount of pressure on the state. And how do we actually have a community of people that are actually sort of like invested here? I also think that creates an opportunity to actually take something like the tech economy and say like, all right, how does that become more inclusive of Western Massachusetts? how does that actually reach more communities within the city of Boston with some of the investments in internet and technology and other things and training. And so, my goal and my focus is to say, listen, we're going to be part of a community, but how do we actually take this opportunity to extend that community and create richer experiences as we go forward? And I think that, to me, is the big challenge for us.
I'm curious, Aisha, how do you see, just as an employer, because obviously you're not just an educator, you're an employer, how do you see the flexibility continuing post-pandemic?
I predict that it will continue, and we have employees who live out of state now. We had that before March, and I think as an higher ed institution, there's a lot more flexibility like that anyway, because a lot of times at the level of faculty anyway, people aren't necessarily on campus 5 days a week anyway. So I think as an industry, as a sector, it's probably one where there's an opportunity to look at what higher ed does do. There are a lot of people in higher ed who don't live in the same state as the college where they work. But I think what that means is for us to think carefully about unintended consequences of saying, okay, we're going to be even more flexible than we are now, and making sure that we've thought through, what that means. And I do think that there are, we're going to have to reckon with the way that we formalize this. I think a lot of us are going through, especially at small and mid-sized employers, like we have 70 full-time employees and many part-time or adjunct faculty. We probably haven't formalized things yet, because we're still in this moment of emergency, but we will need to get there. And I think that in some ways is kind of where things get harder, because you have to make decisions and somebody's going to be more inconvenienced than they are now. But we will get there. And those are the things that we need to think through. But I'd say oddly, while there's more volume of people working flexibly, we already had many of these practices in place.
Great. Well, I think we got time for one more question. We got about 5 minutes left here. How reasonable is it for us to hope that this workforce disruption will be an opportunity to give folks skills to build and enhance resilient infrastructure that we need to thrive in the 21st century? I guess it's another one of those, maybe there's some bright side to all of this. Are we going to see, is this, there's obviously inequity before pandemic. Pandemic is in many ways exacerbating that, but can this also be sort of a wake-up call? Are we going to see some changes in retraining, or do you think that's going to be hard? Aisha, you might as well start with you.
Yes, it's going to be hard. And yes, we should see that. I think we don't have a choice as an economy at the local level or the state level, except to make this a moment where we intentionally build pathways to inclusion. So I'll be short because I actually want to hear what Neil and Corey have to say on this one. All
right, Corey, what's your take?
I agree it's going to be hard, but I actually think it's absolutely both doable, even though it's going to be difficult. If you look, I think the opportunity is that as organizations and companies became more global, it frayed local communities and sort of like created less affiliation, around the world. And it impacted investment, and it impacted sort of like people sort of like feeling that like, hey, I have to make sure that people graduate from these schools have opportunities and jobs. I actually think that that's going to do long-term damage to the economy, both in the US and here within the Commonwealth. And what I would say, though, is that we have a very unique opportunity, I think, in front of us. If you think about sort of like technology, we can have a larger share of technology, advanced manufacturing. We have a great base of healthcare. And while that's difficult now, I think it's a great thing to actually have people engaged. And when you think about like the infrastructure that actually comes up there's lots of things that will be invested into the future. I think one of the people asked the question earlier about, like, we talked about a few narrow set of industries, but there's construction, there's all these different things. When you think about the ability for people to be able to live in a lot more affordable places, to be able to work for companies in different modalities, whether that's completely remote or not. And when you think about the type of investments we need to make over the next 10 years, both in the Commonwealth and in the US in general, there are job opportunities aplenty to actually sort of like for the Commonwealth to actually fill. It does require a massive effort for us to rethink how we make investments, how employers like Rapid7 think about sort of like how they actually find and how they partner with other institutions to actually bring employees in. And that is difficult because, you know, one thing that we know about us humans in general is that we can adapt to actual change, but we don't like it very much. And what I would say is that the change has already been forced upon us. And I would say that we need to take full advantage to make sure that we get the benefits of the change that we're going through anyway. And so I think it's possible, but we got to like continue to be focused on this exact issue around jobs as the preeminent issue in front of us as we go forward.
Thanks, Corey. Neil, I know you could probably talk all day about this topic, but you've only got a minute or two left. What's your take?
So I would build on what both Aisha and Corey said. You know, the underlying condition that's been revealed is the income and wealth disparities in our society. There's an increasing awareness that this is racial, at least in its large profile, and that the space between us has not been bridged. We haven't created a beloved community anywhere in this country, anywhere. And as Corey said, disruption is the opportunity for change. Disruption changes everything. And the question is, will you go back or do you have a plan for going forward? You know, we can be together and not get in our cars. We can do work together. We can redistribute time and space through this internet vehicle. And it's happening. We don't even have to make it happen. The question is, can we organize it productively and inclusively?
Great. Well, it's good to always end on an up note. I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Megan Sandall at Boston Medical Center. And I really appreciate everyone tuning in today. This has really been a great discussion. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions. You can always feel free to email me directly. Dr. Sandall, do you want to talk about what, maybe bid farewell, but also talk a little bit about what BMC is doing in this regard?
Yeah, first, just thank you so much for having us today. As Abby from JP Morgan Chase talked about, Boston Medical Center is leading a really large place-based initiative called the Boston Opportunity System Collaborative. And I just want to highlight a couple of things. BMC is leading it, but honestly, it is a really important cross-sector partnership. It's with Boston Children's Hospital, Brigham and Women's. We're working with Health Resources in Action, deep engagement with the city of Boston, and really four, I think, really important key community and other leaders with Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, Blue Hub Loan Fund, Action for Equity, and JVS Boston. And I just want to highlight, this has been an amazing panel. And I think it really, the themes that were brought up today really highlight what we want to do with this Boston Opportunity System approach, right? We know that talent is evenly distributed, opportunity is not. And so how do we intentionally build a system? And so I just want to highlight, I think each of the speakers raised it. So Neil talked about the need to talk about housing, right? And so in this case, we're really talking about approaching three neighborhoods, right? Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan that we know are under pretty extreme displacement pressures. And so how do we build or preserve affordable housing in those communities for people at all income levels? And then how do we pair that with really intentional job pools and pipelines? That intentionality of an ecosystem that's working together is going to be really critical. I thought Aisha brought up a really important part about resiliency, right? We know that we need need to be looking at resilient jobs. And so where are the sectors? Healthcare, tech, biotech. And so how do we really reach out and start thinking about those resilient jobs that we can try to create? And then I think Corey really hit on this idea of how do we build career ladders, right? How do we look for people that are not the traditional necessary candidates? And how do we really make a commitment that we are going to look at them and be able to create new things? And so to an extent, I think this collaborative is really answering the question of how we as anchor institutions, not just hospitals, but other businesses work together in order to make this really an important economic mobility reality. And I think COVID's going to be a hard challenge, no doubt about it, but I think we can rise to it. And we're really excited to get started. We just want to thank again, JP Morgan Chase for what I consider the venture philanthropy to build and catalyze something for a long lasting change. So thank you.